Welcome to the Knowledge for Men show. Your life will never be the same.
Your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development.
I want to die empty of regret. I want to die empty of my best work. We don't understand who we are. Instead, we're living out somebody else's narrative.
What one man can do, another man can do. If it's been done, it can be done again.
Being yourself and being your truest, most authentic self in every moment. If it scares you or makes you a little afraid, do it. Follow your heart and your gut.
The first stage, I think, is finding you, like finding out who I am today.
Stuff will not work. You will have things that fail. Success is when you're a happy, fulfilled person. How do you define success?
It's your life, and you are the creator of the movie script that is your life story.
Hey guys, every Wednesday, I'm going to be hosting a live online event sharing my biggest lessons in an action-packed presentation designed to help you go from where you are now to where you want to be. I'm helping men break through their biggest limiting beliefs to create the life they want. Plus, after the presentation, I'm going to do an open Q&A where I answer all of your questions. To register for my next event, go to kfmlive.com. Again, that's kfmlive.com. Register now before the event fills up. Hope to see you there. All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm here with Craig Filek, a depth coach with over 20 years of experience in transformative men's work, shadow work, and authentic relating, helping men clarify their purpose, making a powerful contribution, and stepping into their flow. Craig, happy to have you here on the show.
Thanks, man.
Craig, so we start off every show with a success quote or maybe some sort of saying that the guest has lived by. So share with us what you got and what that means to you.
Cool. So I've been chewing on this for a couple weeks, and I think the one that just is really the cornerstone of my adult life, I learned it very early on in my professional career, was from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And the quote is, "In every adversity lies the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit."
I think that is just how we should look at all of our challenges. Like when we look at adversity, we often are overwhelmed. We get hit by that wave, but there's always that gift, that lesson that can be found. How has this quote, how has this saying here impacted you on your journey?
You know, I had a really great vision for my life. And, I was in my early 20s and I had this beautiful woman and I had these amazing plans to go travel and do all kinds of cool stuff. And then we got pregnant and that was that. So it was very hard for me, frankly, because I was ready to go cut loose. I just graduated and was sort of done with my social contract and my family contract, to finish college and, just to do the whole thing. And I was free. And then all of a sudden I was grounded again. And it was really, really hard, right? Because I was in a town that I never planned to be in an old Rust Belt town in upstate New York. And, I belong out West. I mean, that's just sort of my vibe, let's say. And so it was really challenging. I was not connecting with a lot of people here. There was not a lot of opportunity. It wasn't like Google doesn't have, they don't have a headquarters here or anything. It was just tough. But out of that, I really got squeezed. And my daughter just turned 15 a couple weeks ago. And, I'm looking at this body of work that has just sort of accumulated around me in this cauldron that I've been stewing in all this time. And I think about would I have done it differently? And of course, there's, a million different directions I would have gone. But when I look at the one that I was kind of squeezed into and I see what's coming through in this longer arc of my own development, I got to say, it's quite remarkable. And at this point, I'm just sort of trusting the process. Yeah.
And interesting, you call them contracts, the social contract, the family contract. What is that? Are these just social obligations? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I don't refer to it too frequently like that, but I just remember feeling that way. I'll be 40 in May, so this is going back over 20 years now, or just shy of 20 years. And I just remember feeling like, wow, like I'm free. Like I was in this tunnel of I don't even call it education. People say the education system is broken in this country. Well, we don't have an education system in this country. We have a schooling system in this country. And the schooling system is getting the exact result it was designed to get. the American government gets what the American government wants, and it just prints enough money to make sure that that is always the case. So don't ever be fooled by thinking that something is somehow broken. It's exactly the way it's supposed to be. And there was just this 16-year kind of tunnel that I felt like I was in, and I couldn't find a way. There wasn't, if you ever drive through whatever's the Holland Tunnel, there's no exit ramps until you get through, and then all of a sudden there's all these options, and it just felt like, wow, I'm free. This is amazing. And then next thing you know, I'm in another tunnel. So I guess I use the term social contract to just sort of describe this feeling of being stuck in something you couldn't get out of.
Yeah, I could feel that. And you're stuck in this tunnel that you say. What led you into this path of transformative men's work? What was some of the tipping points in your life that led you down here?
Perfect example. So my first real girlfriend in high school, I'm not even going to get into what an adversity that was, just to go back to the quote. But the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit that came out of it was I ended up going to see a psychologist that he was recommended to my folks. And so I went to see him, and within 3 sessions or so, he told me about Mankind Project. And I was 18, so I was a little young for it. But I ended up finding out about it, and all the lights and bells went off, and I was like, hell yes, that's exactly what I want to do. So I came out to Rochester, where I am now, and I did my freshman year at Rochester Institute of Technology. I got initiated in Mankind Project. I sat in a circle for that first year and just explored, my creative self. I explored the world of gold and shadow and mission and purpose and men's work and, sweat lodges and just the Jungian psychodrama that is such a part of the initiation of, modern culture. I mean, we don't go out in the woods and, knock each other's teeth out and tattoo each other's faces anymore. It's more like a psychological initiation. But that was really the beginning of it for me. And that was, I guess about 21, 22 years ago now.
When did you feel like you had outgrown that? Because you said you were in it for a year or so. At what point did you feel like, I'm okay? And or did you find something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think we ever outgrow it. I mean, once we're initiated, we're sort of in the realm of the sacred masculine.
Just that group. Just
for
talking
MKP,
about, yeah, just talking about the group and how you're still on the path. You're always on the journey, but you'll find that there are other mentors and other leaders and support systems available as you begin.
Yeah, I stayed with it for quite a while, and I was in different groups in different places that I moved to. And which is one of the great things about Mankind Project is it's worldwide. So, I can't recommend it highly enough. But, there is a point at which we start to grow. And I actually came across Jason Gaddis, who I know you interviewed quite a while back. And I think his stuff is great as well. He does more relationship stuff now, but there was a 3-year period where he was doing, it started as the Revolutionary Man and became the men's leadership training. And I was on staff the second 2 years. But it was great because he brought in women into the men's work. He brought in medicine work. And there was just, the whole Boulder community and vibe that eventually became the Integral Center, included the Authentic Man program stuff, the whole authentic relating. So that whole body of work really became the next tier in my men's work, so to speak. And at this point, I'm just sitting still. I'm still involved in MKP, but it's really just sitting in my place and just appreciating Rochester for what it is, which is a very insular, sort of isolating kind of experience for me. But in that, I'm finding, I'm going deeper within myself.
I like that. Able to find, going back to your quote again, able to find that seed of a greater benefit. You talked to us for a second about the shadow. Okay, so let's go more into the shadow and how this impacts men.
Wow. Okay. Shadow is, I'm actually rereading a book right now called Owning Your Own Shadow. It's like 100 pages. It is by a man named Robert A. Johnson, who was Jung's youngest student. And he's got about a dozen books that they come from lectures mostly, and they're all about 100 pages. And it is some of the richest, most accessible reading in the Jungian tradition. And this one book in particular, I've been rereading, and I've actually been recording it on my GarageBand because it's just so good. And I want to have a recorded copy. I don't know if I can share it. I don't know if that's legal, but here's what I'm getting out of this book. He talks about the shadow as everything that we hide, repress, and deny. It's part of our acculturation process. So the way I like to describe it is, when we're boys, we get told, no, good boys don't do those things. Good boys don't say those things. And because we are hardwired evolutionarily to, stay with our family, stay with our group, we have to push away the things that are not approved of. And that process is actually really necessary. I know my ex has a 3-year-old and almost a 5-year-old, and these boys they're not socialized. They're like little wild animals still. And it's great and it's brilliant and I love them for that. And if they grew up, in Africa, they have the saying, if we don't initiate the boys, they'll burn the village down. And that's totally true. And I see that in our government, and it's kind of wild. That's why I say, initiation is so important, as we were talking about some of the programs you run just before this call. It's so critical. But in that process of acculturation, when we push these things away, you can think of it like a narrowing, so we have this broad range. And as it gets narrowed down by culture, some of the things on the left-hand side are, the ugly, sinful, don't go there things. But on the other side, on the right-hand side, are these beatific, brilliant, genius aspects of ourselves. And because we narrow the range overall, we lose access to both. And so one side is the shadow, the other side is our gold. And that process, ultimately, we need to come back and become whole. We need to turn and face that shadow. And very much, in the way that we see in like the Grail legend, or, even like The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, you face the dragon, and the dragon is protecting your gold. So all of these places where we've trained ourselves not to go for fear of, being exiled from our group, from our family, from our community, and being left out to be saber-toothed tiger food, 100,000 years ago. Our brains just haven't evolved that much since then. We have to psychologically learn to push through that and actually turn and face the shadow, and then get the gold out of the shadow and become whole again. So there's like a 3-stage kind of process there. And I'm so engrossed in this. It's the most fascinating stuff to
I know,
me.
I can tell this is great. Even just the tone of your voice, you're like coming alive with the shadow here. And let's go into some common examples of shadows that men encounter around, let's say, purpose.
Sure. So, it makes me want to go and see if I can find this quote. I was just looking at it. He talks about it, and I've incorporated a lot of this into purpose mapping, where really oftentimes purpose is relegated to this thing of like, it's something I've got to do, but it's really who you are. It's why you exist, regardless of what you do. It's just how you show up. I know a coach who had this really brilliant metaphor. He said, you walk into a room and it's like you've got this light bulb, this colored light bulb over your head. And so it tints the room. It kind of, gives, maybe it's a blue light bulb, right? When Andrew walks into the room, you bring this blue hue to the room, and that's all you see. And then when you leave, everybody notices, whoa, the blue hue is gone, but you don't recognize that. And so your purpose is kind of like that. It's just the way that you are. It's why you exist and how you show up.
That's a big point, though, because I think it can often be confused with like, my purpose is to build this media company or build this like fitness company, where it's like that's more of a goal compared to a purpose, where it's like a way of life, a way of being.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Jim Collins actually, he wrote Good to Great and Built to Last, and he's actually got this really cool book called Beyond Entrepreneurship. They don't even have a hardcover version of it, but it's so worth getting. And he really breaks down all of his research, and he helps to crystallize the definition of purpose, of vision, of mission, for companies. But I think it's really accurate. So your purpose is why you exist, whether yourself or your company. Your mission is what you aim to accomplish. So those who are familiar with Jim Collins' work, they call it a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. So when you talk about building a company, he says like a 10 to 30 year goal, like an objective, something you're actually going to accomplish. And I think in our personal lives, I give it like a 3 to 10 year. It's like the mountain that you're climbing is the description that he gives. But going back to the purpose and the shadow, I'm just going to read this if that's okay.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So this is on page 17 of Owning Your Own Shadow. He says, the more refined our conscious personality, the more shadow we have built up on the other side. So he talks about it like a teeter-totter. and how we need to get back into the center. Because like in Buddhism, they call it the middle way. He says this is one of Jung's greatest insights, that the ego and the shadow come from the same source and exactly balance each other. To make light is to make shadow. One cannot exist without the other. To own one's own shadow is to reach a holy place, an inner center, not attainable in any other way. To fail this is to fail one's own sainthood and to miss the purpose of life. So I think ultimately the purpose of life is to become whole, is to reclaim our wholeness. We go through this 3-stage process of, being sort of in the Garden of Eden. We're children, we're, sort of ignorance is bliss. And then all of a sudden we get wounded, there's some sort of trauma, and we realize, whoa, there's like other things besides me. And I need to learn how to navigate them and avoid them or get them or, whatever our game becomes. But eventually we have to transcend that and include the paradox of our gold and our shadow. And that is ultimately the purpose of life, is to just regain our wholeness.
So are we born whole?
Yes.
And then we lose our wholeness through maybe some of these, what you called contracts earlier, or maybe just going through life, we get the traumas, the hurts that they come in, the fingers pointed at us, the damage done, we start to lose a piece of that wholeness. And maybe this happens even before the age of 10.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's true. I mean, I was adopted. So for me, it happened very young, at birth, really. And I think that's part of what set me off on the path. But, it's just that pain that we feel, that gnawing inside, that when we sit still long enough, causes us to want to go out and, have another drink, or go out and, whatever, get laid or surf porn or build another $1 million company. I mean, whatever it is, there's that gnawing sensation. And ultimately, nothing that we do outside of ourselves, and I'm speaking to myself here because I do not have this handled, but this is the process, is coming back into ourselves and being able to turn and face that wound, face that pain, face that shadow that we've been hiding, repressing, and denying in shame, and look at it and recognize, oh, it's just this tender, immature part of ourselves that was wounded, and our nervous system literally, physiologically couldn't handle the intense amount of sensation. And so we stored it in our muscle memory, we stored it in our nervous system. And when we go back and actually feel it and heal it, it can start to flow again, and eventually it does heal. And so I've experienced that over the past 20 years. I'm not done. I wouldn't want to give anyone the illusion that I'm done, but it's certainly transformed quite a bit. And I highly recommend people learning to just be with yourself, whether it's through meditation or, whatever your process is, that whole making is ultimately the purpose of life.
Is it possible to have just none of these hurts, or you called it like that feeling, or it's just like, oh, what is that? Like just that, like there's something there, like it's not right. It's this thing that's really bothering me. Is it possible to not have any of that?
I think in like fleeting moments, I don't think that's the goal of life. Everyone that I've spoken with and studied, I had a Zen Roshi who his whole shtick was, I'm enlightened, take me to hell. Let's test this out. Let's see, take me back to my family. Let's go home for the holidays and see how enlightened I really am, because all of those old wounds get triggered again. And that's the process, is just continuing to go and face it. And yeah, there's moments of epiphanies, and yeah, there's joy and bliss, but I don't think that that's ultimately the purpose of life, is to be happy. Fulfilled, yes. But that comes from contribution. That comes from digging in. That comes from turning and facing these limitations we impose on ourselves, or the beliefs we've picked up, and pushing through them. There's something fulfilling about that, just like there's something fulfilling about, pushing our edges as like an extreme athlete, skiing off cliffs and stuff like that. There's just something inherently fulfilling about pushing through the limitations that we've somehow accumulated through our life and breaking through. And as a friend of mine used to say, we break through one cage into a bigger cage, and then we just repeat that process again and again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think living a life where there's no challenge would be very mundane.
Yeah.
I think it's good to be and healthy to be on a journey. Of course, take your breaks, but very healthy to be on a journey and experiencing some level of challenge. I think it really brings us alive. Like when we have a project, when we have something that is consuming our time and we're building something, especially when it's something that's in alignment to what our purpose is or what is at our core. I think that's like, I encourage men to pursue that challenge, to go into that challenge, to walk into that unknown. I think that path is a much more gratifying path.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Now, looking at, we talked about some of the shadow work here and just giving guys an introduction to this work, and you gave us some great resources. What was the name of the book again, just for those who are like didn't get a chance to write it down?
Yeah, it's called Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert A. Johnson. And, if you go online or on Amazon, I get all his books used because you can get them in hardcover. And these are the kind of books that you want to pass down to your grandkids. I mean, they're so good. They're so accessible. So I would just recommend getting everything you can by him, honestly.
Okay. So
you won't be disappointed. I promise. I promise. It's so good.
Yeah. And talking just a bit about the shadow there, and now coming into some of the work you do here with authentic relating, how is this beneficial for men, and how does this impact relationships?
So there's 3 levels of communication. And, the one is that we're most versed in is just the sort of surface level transactional. Hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine. It's bullshit. I mean, everybody knows that, but it's the social niceties. And so we go through that. And then there's informational of like, oh, this is what's going on. And then we get down into an actual authentic level of relating where there's a lot more presence with self and with other. And there's nowhere to get to. There's no real transaction happening. And so simply being present, and it gets into that feeling state, being able to feel it, to heal it type of thing. And I've been in rooms, and there's a whole number of different games. And if you can find an authentic relating community in your area, or even if you have to drive a couple 100 miles, it's so worth it. But I've been in rooms of people where it's almost like a present moment, body-based, sensation-focused meditation. So it's like an intersubjective meditation. And, we would sit in groups of 6 or 8 people and spend 45 minutes only speaking from that present moment, body-based, sensation-oriented place. And within about 30, 40 minutes, something pretty magical would open up. I mean, I think our neurochemistry would literally shift. It's a pretty remarkable experience. And to me, it's just a lot more gratifying than shooting the shit, so to speak.
Yeah. So you talked about that was it that first layer? Immediately I was thinking of like a conversation that you would have with like a grocery store clerk.
Exactly.
Like it's just real quick. It's just like, oh, doing good. How did you find everything? It was great. Yeah, I found everything. How's your day? It's good. Good. And the second layer of conversation might be with a friend where maybe you're talking about how your week went. Mm-hmm. Maybe like just, so you are being a little vulnerable. You're sharing some of the challenges you're experiencing that week. But a more authentic conversation, let me think here, it could be something, let's say in that same conversation, but then maybe, let's say someone, I'm thinking like maybe someone starts stuttering or is having a hard time expressing himself about how his relationship is going maybe. And maybe there's like the other person's like, whoa, what was that? And then it's like he found something, and then that guy starts opening up more deeper into what's really going on underneath his typical week.
Yeah. So as a
form of just getting to the core of like what's really going on with that guy.
Right. So that's like a tell or like a truth response, right? Uh-huh. The stuttering, right? And then in that, I think the other important piece is that there's no like agenda. Uh-huh. Right. We're not therapizing. We're not trying to fix it. I'm not trying to make you better because I'm uncomfortable with the discomfort you're bringing into the conversation. I'm able to say, wow, hearing you say that, talking about whatever the challenge in your relationship, I noticed my solar plexus just like caved in and I'm feeling a little contracted in my heart. And then they say, well, yeah, I feel like I would just want to start bawling. And then I might say, cool, well, I'm good with that. I might start bawling too. Would you like to cry on my shoulder? I mean, it's just that level of interaction is what we're talking about with authentic relating.
I think it's very powerful, and I think it's an area that maybe even some of the listeners are thinking, do I even want to do that? That sounds a little feminine or weak. Why would I want to be engaged in something like that?
Yeah. Well, it's chick crack. I mean, it's it's like being able to come into a more, I don't know if it's feminine or not. I mean, there's definitely a tremendous amount of presence required for that, but it's definitely a highly relational practice. And you'll meet a lot of amazing women if you can get involved in it, if you find it locally.
I think too, just, a big takeaway for some of the men could just be understanding. You said those 3 different layers of communication. It's like, I wonder what is the impact, or if someone's operating, let's say 80% of all of his interactions are in that first layer where it's very external surface layer conversations. Like what is that in proportion to his quality of relationships in life versus someone who is, let's say, on the other end where it's 80% more at a deeper, more authentic level. What proportion does that have on his quality of relationships in his life? And I'm sure obviously we would know the answer to that.
Yeah.
And so just sharing some of those benefits and how that can really impact both relationships with men and women.
I'm glad you brought it up, man. I think it's definitely a service to share this type of stuff with men because it's so rare. I mean, it's not done very much. Like such a small portion of the population has ever even heard of it, let alone had a chance to experience it, let alone practicing it on a regular basis.
Absolutely. And I think too, just I'm thinking back at like some of my, or most of my past, just growing up. And I think I was predominantly living in that kind of first layer, very surface layer type of conversation. And that would point out to why I felt maybe disconnected from so many people, even though I was surrounded by so many people.
Well, that's the paradox of our generation and of our society. I mean, he talks about that in Owning Your Shadow is, we've got technology and, appliances and conveniences and connectivity that is just astronomical. I mean, it's off the charts. And of course, the other side of the seesaw is we feel lonelier and more disconnected and bored. I mean, do you think boredom existed 100,000 years ago? Probably not. Like our brains aren't wired for this much free time to do nothing. We were out, hunting and gathering. We were, running for our lives, making fires. I mean, there was something to do. And now there's like nothing to do and we're bored and we're disconnected and lonely. And that's the other side of the seesaw.
Yeah. Also too, like back in the day, I think becoming a 25-year-old man was like reaching the peak.
You're an elder.
You're an elder at 25. Yeah. If you're in your 30s, like you are like, whoa, like what does this guy know about life? And so we live so much longer too. And yeah, I think boredom is, I was just going to say the death of man, but I was like, ooh, maybe that's too far, but then maybe that's right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if you consider most people are sort of the Walking Dead, right? The whole zombie apocalypse thing. We're doing Mankind Project is there's an annual elders gathering, and it's actually going to be in the Finger Lakes up here in the Rochester area this year in October. And so I got invited into the committee to how are we going to do this? And the main thing that I was able to add, the main contribution was to say, look, when we stand up there in the beginning and open this thing, the theme of it is bridging the divide. So the idea is to have a little skit with a man and a woman from each of the 4 generations. So the great generation, which was, like the Depression, up into the first, even the Second World War, and then the boomers, the Gen Xers, and then the millennials. And to talk about, this is what my life was like when I was growing up. I mean, I've heard stories that, back in the day, they used to have not co-ed gym class and all the boys would go swim naked in the pool together. And I'm thinking like, man, that shit would be illegal these days, but It was a very different time. So, to just kind of get grounded in what is my life, where am I coming from? And then to talk about how we learned to disconnect from women, how we learned to disconnect from other races, other, transgender wasn't even, I remember telling my daughter, she was wearing a rainbow pin on her backpack. And I'm like, do you know kids that, she's like, yeah, everyone I know is like some other variation of gender. And I'm like, that's funny. Cause when I was a kid, there were 2 options and one of them wasn't okay. So, things are getting more colorful, but we're still, the millennials are disconnecting on their cell phones. So there's just this whole way that this is happening, and then have the whole weekend be about these types of authentic relating games and social justice presentations, different breakout sessions to help people realize, wow, this is how I've personally disconnected from myself, get reconnected, get connected to each other, and that can somehow bridge the divide between the sexes, between the generations, between the races, between the genders, all this. And that type of work is so powerful. And that's why I love to continue to participate in MKP, because it really is, this is the work we need to be doing. We've got the technology. What we don't have is the high touch, the authenticity. And that's really, to me, that's the edge of where our development is as a civilization.
So what do you think leads to a man disconnecting? Like what
in this day and age?
Yeah. In this day and age, like what would be a series of things that
I think we learn it from our fathers. And if, think of how many boys are raised without fathers, first of all. And second of all, if their fathers are around, my dad was around, like we did stuff. Present. He would leave at 6 a.m. and come home at 6 p.m. and then he was tired and, he worked his ass off and we had nice things and we had the, lake house and the boat and we would go up there and, we'd fish together and the little things. He's a great guy, but was he there, in the way that, 5,000 or even 500 years ago, boys and men were sort of apprentice and there was like a whole sort of lineage in the way that our DNA evolved, to pass down things. And I think now what we pass down is disconnection. So I think that's where it starts. And then, of course, you get a whole bunch of boys together. And we used to have things like one-room schoolhouses. And now you've got a whole bunch of kids, 30-odd kids in one classroom with one teacher who's overwhelmed as it is and can't monitor and facilitate connection. And these kids just become, it's like Lord of the Flies, and the whole thing just, it's bullying and shaming and, it's just a toxic waste dump. And it's amazing that we even survive with a shred of our own hearts. But that, I think, is a testament to the gold and the shadow, is that there's always a seed of an equivalent benefit in there. We just got to do the fucking work to get it out. And nobody shows us how to do that work. So, again, that's why I love MKP and a whole host of other, there's a ton of other things. You do initiation, you do rite of passage stuff. Find that. If you're listening to this, find it somewhere and go out and treat yourself to your masculine heritage of ritual initiation and rites of passage. It's your birthright. And without it, you're missing a tremendous aspect of your life, of your own soul, connection with men, and, service to the world.
Yeah. Real connection with men. And
real connection.
Authentic connection with other like-minded men from, I did many events last year. I did 4 events last year. They're all sold out events. And many men would say that, this was, at first coming into it, they didn't know what was going on or what to expect. And they're kind of very scared or nervous and kind of second guessing if they should be coming out.
That's perfect. That's
right. Exactly. And I'm kind of leading. And that's typically, what I expect. And by the end of it, I was just waiting like, oh, I can't wait to see this guy at the end of the 3 days because, he'll come up and give me a hug and tell me it was like one of the best experiences that he's ever had. Or maybe it'll come in the form of an email a couple of weeks later or months later. And it is something that men don't realize is missing. But once experienced, it just won't be the same ever again. Not necessarily trying to like plug my events, but just sharing along those lines that, men don't realize that it is something very important and critical to their self-development. And it impacts every aspect of their lives. And so it's really important to just, whether you come out to an event with me or someone else, it's just to focus and work on yourself.
Yeah.
In some shape or form. Yeah.
Where was your rite of passage? Like, where did that happen for you?
I have an interesting way of viewing my own rite of passage, but I feel very strongly that mine came from when I quit my job, when I broke up with my girlfriend, and when I moved back home, and when I was sleeping also on my brother's couch, and I was trying to build something that had no, just being on edge of, if you look at like your health, your wealth, your relationships, and personal growth, I felt like every single one of those was in shambles. I also came up with a chronic, like on top of all of this, I ended up having a chronic pelvic pain disorder at the same time. My car was breaking down. I just remember I couldn't believe that this could, like, so many things were just happening and going wrong. So it wasn't an experience like a day or a week or a month, but it was a long journey that was probably about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And coming out of that, I just know what I can do. I know so much more about myself, and I know what I can handle, and I know I just feel very much at peace with who I am and where I'm going.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in our DNA. I mean, if you look at all the, look at the proliferation of tattoos and piercings. I mean, this is ritual shit that is not handed down in a ritual way anymore. And men will find it. Like, it'll find you. I mean, it'll find you. So it's in your DNA, and it's one way or another, life wants you to take that leap from boyhood into manhood. And so watch out. Because it's coming, right? It'll get you.
Yeah. Okay. And looking at some of so for those that don't know, Craig had reached out to me several months ago, and we did an exercise together on working on purpose. And, I'm curious to where, this started for you. Like, when did you start this whole process for yourself and other people and making that contribution?
Cool. Yeah, I think, similar to your story, I was 25, 26, something like that. And there was just this massive turning point. I looked at my life, I looked at my resources, I looked at my relationship, and I had about a 1-year-old daughter, and things were just not going my way, like not even remotely. And I had to make a decision. It was like Jim Rohn talks about the day that changes your life. There was just this point where I was like, yeah, this is not going to continue like this. And I ended up separating. I never married, but leaving that relationship the same month that I started my first business, which was the same month that my car got totaled. Which was, it was just,
I'm relating with a lot of these.
Right. It's like yeah. So, and there was just this point where I realized, that's when I found out about David Data. I had been initiated already about 7 years earlier or so. But there was just this point where I decided, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to get this handled. And I had been turned on a little bit through some sales. I got into sales because I had a philosophy degree and I didn't really have any marketable job skills. And so I ended up in sales.
I heard, there was, I think it's Grant Cardone or someone where he says, like, if you end up with a degree that you can't get an immediate job, you end up in sales.
Yeah, which was like the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, you learned so much.
A personal development haven. I got to see Zig Ziglar, and I started reading about leadership, and it was great. And so, from there, I was just like, I couldn't get a date to save my life. And they're not, not to knock Rochester, but it's not that kind of town for me. Boulder, San Francisco, great dating towns. Rochester, it's a family town. We'll just put it that way. So it was, I spent every single Saturday night in Barnes and Nobles, and I just devoured the psychology, self-help, business, relationship. Every single section, I would just sit there and I filled notebooks. I had stacks of notebooks, and I literally just burned last January. It was sort of like a big turning point for me because I achieved everything that I set out to achieve and realized that I didn't even want it anymore once I got it 10 years later. So really it was about a 10-year process, maybe a 12-year process where I was developing, I started connecting all these dots, and I started seeing, wow, a lot of personality profile stuff that was helping me understand myself. Because again, being adopted, there was just a lot of like, who am I? Why am I here? A lot of the business stuff, there was a lot of talk about, you have to start with purpose, and then you get into your goals. And then you get into strategy, and then you get into tactics, right? So just starting to comb out, how does this all fit together? And what I noticed, after about 10 years of this, the more money I made, the more money I invested. I think you might know this quote. There was a guy, was it Epictetus? Somebody said, it was like a Greek, maybe a Stoic, who said, with whatever money I have, I buy books, and whatever's left, I'll buy food and clothes. It's like, and my book collection just blew up. And so eventually I started connecting these dots and seeing like, okay, everybody is talking about the same stuff. And I would go and I would invest in courses. I would go to, seminars. All the money I made from my entrepreneurship, I just doubled down on investing in myself and my growth because I realized that was my ticket out of this nightmare I was in. Yeah. And everybody's talking about the same stuff. There's only so much stuff to talk about. And there's principles, there are these principles. Stephen Covey talks about principles. But everybody wants to call it their own thing because they want to put their own twist on it, their own brand, so that they can charge you money for it, even though you already studied it over here, right? And some people have like parts of the puzzle. Everybody's telling the truth, but it's partial. So over this time, I just started aggregating all these data points and like this bigger picture started to amalgamate in my psyche. And I saw, okay, it starts with purposes at the top. Why do I exist? And then there's part of that is getting the gold out of your shadow, using that to fuel the development of your strengths. And there's a map of psychological wholeness that I'm not going to get into all the details here. But from there, it gets into a vision of, how do I want to serve the world? What is my life about? And then my mission, which is that 3 to 10 year objective. I'm climbing up this mountain. I'm going to get to the top, plant my flag. Like that's my mission. That's what I'm doing. And then there's like a base camp along the way. I call it a milestone. So like a 6-week to 6-month sort of, just you got to have some successes along the way to celebrate. So this is like a benchmark. And then there's your clear next step, which is there's a great book called The One Thing by Gary Keller, who built the biggest real estate firm in the world. And he built it all by asking one simple question. What one thing can I do that will make everything else towards achieving this goal easier or unnecessary? So you look at your milestone, you say, all right, what one thing am I going to do today or tomorrow or this week? And then who's going to support me to make sure that I pull this off? Do I need a coach? Do I need a graphic designer? Do I need a lawyer? What do I need to make sure that I pull this off? And then what are my daily practices? What are the things I'm doing in the areas of self, body, relationships, and systems? And at the very bottom of this thing, one of the systems is your contribution system. And so when people get to the end of purpose mapping, they say, okay, great, I know my purpose. So who cares? Like, how do I make a living with this? And I say, build your contribution system, which is what you're giving into the market and what you're receiving back. Build that around your flow state. When you're on purpose, you're in flow. Everything is energized and focused, and there's this effortless ease and intrinsic motivation. You're doing it for the sheer joy of it. Find that thing. And then start to layer. It's almost like dipping a wick. That's your flow state, and you dip it in wax. And every time you dip it, you're sort of building structure around this flow state so that it's more stable and sturdier, and it'll burn longer and brighter. And you just keep adding little things to expand your contribution system, like literally systemize it, whether it's an online marketing system or, whatever it's going to be for you, until you're just in flow and your life is supporting you to stay in flow. And that's how you live your purpose. So that's a 15-year journey. And that's one of the seeds of equivalent or greater benefit that came out of finding myself in the trenches.
Right. No, it's great. It's great to hear the journey because people can relate with that journey in many ways of your struggle and your story of challenge and triumph. And I can very much relate with your story with the books. I was picturing myself when I was starting this whole thing out that I was using the libraries because if you go to a library, most libraries have like a used section and the books are 50 cents or they're a quarter. And so I remember I was buying books that I had no idea were going to be some of have the biggest impacts on my life. Like I bought Tony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within for I think it was 75 cents, and I didn't know who the guy was. I bought Stephen Covey. I bought Think and Grow Rich. I bought all these books, Rich Dad Poor Dad. I bought all these classical books. It seems like all the used books are all self-help books that people gave up on or something.
Right.
Because everywhere I went, I kept finding the same books. And I remember I'd gone and driven around all around San Diego to all the libraries, and I came home with a trunk. My entire trunk was full of books for like $25, like $30, and that was a big investment at the time because I was a lot younger. But that was just the hunger for knowledge, the hunger for growth.
Totally. And podcasts, I don't know. I mean, you're younger than I am. Podcasts didn't exist back then. I mean, you couldn't just pop on, while you're driving in your car. Zig Ziglar used to call it Automobile University. Right. And I used to have like an hour-and-a-half commute each way when I was living in Chicago. And, I would just go to the library every week and walk out with a stack of tapes, and just play tapes the whole way. And I just downloaded so much great information from that. So you guys, libraries, books, podcasts, wherever you can get this stuff, just soak it in. Because I think, who was it? Charlie T. Jones was one of the first sort of like trainers I ever listened to. And he said, there's only 2 things that will make you different the person you are today from the person you'll be a year from now, there's only two things that'll make you different: the people you meet and the books you read. And these podcasts count. I mean, when you listen to Andrew's guests, the people you meet through these podcasts count. They're influencing you. They're giving you crucial information. And if you start to connect the dots and align yourself with that information, your life will change in amazing ways.
Yeah, it's just they're a part of the conversation. They're very much a part of this. You said something that like you were on this journey and like you realize everything's the same. I realized that too. I thought that was interesting, but also too, it's like I think a lot of personal development stems really just from the ancient philosophers, like the Greek and Roman philosophers and the Eastern philosophers like Lao Tzu and Confucius. Like a lot of what is said in there is where I believe personal development stems from.
Well, it's principles. I mean, you can't, I mean, it's just, the yin yang. I mean, this is like, I have this whole body of work called Enlightened Child that purpose mapping is a derivative of. But the more that things accelerate, you look at your iPhone, this thing is only going to get more and more powerful. But, in another 20 years or so, we're going to have processing power the same as your iPhone, the size of red blood cells, right? But the thing that's never going to change about that is that it's still built on binary circuits, on, off. I mean, even I was just reading this thing in Discovery Magazine. This guy is growing computer processors out of mycelium, which is the networks that underlie mushrooms that grow out of the ground. There's this mycelium network, and they're finding out how they can actually get cells to switch on and off. It's still binary. It's still the yin yang. It's still yes and no switches, and that's never going to change. So the principles are the principles. It doesn't matter where you get them throughout time. What matters is that you get them and that you do something about them.
Yeah, I think that's the critical part, that you get them, but you do something about it. Because a lot, like I said, a lot of those books that I was reading, they were found in every bookstore. It's like I kept finding Think and Grow Rich and Stephen Covey. I ended up buying like multiple copies to give to friends.
Totally.
And, it's like I felt like when I kept finding them, I was like, oh, did someone like try this and it didn't work? That was what I was thinking. I was like, why do I keep seeing this book? Like, why is everyone donating this book? But the key part, like you said, is really being able to do something about what you're learning. Because at what point in your career, because you're learning so much, did you turn from consumption into production?
Mm-hmm. It comes in waves. I mean, again, one of the first things my greatest mentor taught me was like literally the first phone call we had. He said, listen, everything in the universe is a pulse. Night and day, it's the yin yang again, right? It's just, everything is a pulse, the seesaw, the teeter-totter, right? Gold and shadow. And so everything is going to go in those waves of consumption and production, and it's just going to go back and forth. Now, you might make like a higher frequency where you're consuming something in the morning and then producing something in the afternoon. That can happen. But I've gone through periods where I've just soaked up knowledge for 5-6 years and then produced something for, maybe 6 months. So it's really, I think it's always an ongoing thing. And, my background originally is as an artist.
Yeah.
And so I've always recognized that, there are times when, my system is just, soaking in, and times when it's sort of, expressing out.
Yeah. I think of it kind of like a gauge where it's like you're reading, and there's like this gauge where it's like you're filling it up. And finally, like if it's a cup, like you're filling it up with water, with knowledge, it like overflows. And when it's overflowing, it's almost like a volcano. Like you have to, like something's going to come out, of this. And that's usually what happens when I write a book or like when I create a program or when I do a live event. It's like all I do is, I'm interviewing you guys and I consume so much content in the form of seminars and books and going out. And then it's like, oh, I gotta get this out. Like I got something to say.
Totally.
And it comes out in different expressions.
Yeah.
So wanting to, I'm really enjoying the conversation. I think I looked over and I didn't even realize how long we've been chatting for. Like I'm lost in the conversation, which says a lot about your interaction, your authentic relating skills here, which is really good. I love the sharing and hearing more about your journey. I want to dive now into the knowledge round. Just going to ask you a few more questions to go a little bit deeper here.
Sure.
Guys, after 200 plus interviews, traveling the world, attending dozens of personal growth events, I finally cracked the code on how to unleash the man within. This Wednesday, I'll be sharing my biggest insights on creating the life you want, and I'm doing an open QA with all of you. I'm doing this live event because it gives me a place to connect with the Knowledge for Men community directly versus listening to me now. You get to interact with me. Register for the next event by going to kfmlive.com. Last week's event was a massive success, so don't miss out. There's limited space available. Again, register for the next event by going to kfmlive.com. Welcome to the Knowledge Round, where the guests will be asked rapid-fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime. All right, and so the first question I have for you, Craig, is what do you think was really holding you back from becoming the man you are now today?
I heard you ask this to somebody else, and I thought to myself, "Oh man!" And then he said basically what I was thinking, which is the man I am today. I mean, my image of myself from the inside and what I probably look like on the outside are very different things. But if there was something that was holding me back, his response was hiring a coach. I think that's true. I mean, like I said, with the whole book thing, I mean, I spent every single dime I had on personal development, whether it was books or coaches or therapy or seminars or workshops, whatever I could get my hands on. So I don't know if that's what was holding me back. I think the biggest thing that was holding me back was knowing myself. I really think that's what it comes down to for everybody. I mean, I used to see people rush to the back of a room in a real estate investment seminar and spend $2,000 to $3,000 on courses they were never even going to crack open, let alone apply. And I did. I mean, I make 30 grand in a weekend and, do it again just to prove that it wasn't a fluke, and then just like hate myself for 6 months because it just felt so inauthentic. And I spent, 10, 15 years just bopping around. I've probably tanked more businesses than most people dream of starting in a lifetime. And it's just because they weren't authentic for me. And so the thing that was probably holding me back most was I just didn't know what was authentic for me. And I just had to, kiss a lot of frogs. But had I had what I now have developed as purpose mapping and had that from, somewhere between 14 and 24 in that adolescent phase, and a mentor to really help me to start to fail forward in, measured, recoverable experiments, I think that would have really helped me. But, just like, we were saying earlier, life, the universe, it will find you and it will drag you forward regardless of how much you're banging against the sides of the alley until you finally hit your flow and you can just get into a nice groove and cruise forward. And I don't even know if I'm fully there yet, but certainly more than I ever have been.
Yeah, really good. And what would you say are 3 of your most influential books? And you could use the Owning Your Shadow as one of them.
Yeah, I would say anything by Robert Johnson was huge. Boy, oh boy, I almost want to look around. What do I have here? There's one called The Science of Success. It's actually a compendium of 3 books by Wallace Wattles. This is like the origins of the law of attraction stuff back before it was all fluffed up and the whole secret and everything. And, I've met mentors who have gone, I met the guy who invented ringtones and, they did $1.6 billion in their first year. And he talks about this visualization stuff in his book, and from the same source, I think he even quoted Wallace Wattles. So I've loved his stuff. I highly recommend, I think it's The Science of Getting Rich, or The Science of Being Great, and then The Science of Being Healthy. And all of those are combined in one book called The Science of Success. So I recommend that. And then I'll recommend this guy I just mentioned. This guy's name is Jay Samit. Brilliant. I think, did you interview him, or you're going to interview him, right?
I
connected you. I connected you with a ton of people.
Yeah. I think he's in the queue. I don't think we've done it yet.
It's going to be such a good podcast. His book is called Disrupt You, not Disrupt Yourself. That's another one, but Disrupt You. And I got to tell you, this book is life-changing. I mean, there's so many powerful lessons. I've read it 3 times. Oh, and that reminds me of one more I want to mention, which is The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. And this is the total opposite. It's the completely counterintuitive story of, I've read Steve Jobs' biography, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Elon Musk. I love those stories. Those guys just hammered and pushed through every obstacle and and Michael Singer just relaxed, meditated, did yoga, and ended up as president or CEO of WebMD. It was like $1.5 billion company. And he's like, I don't know how I got here. I don't know how this happened. I just kept saying yes and surrendering into the flow of life. I think that's the model, at least for me, that I want to pursue is look, this doesn't have to be hard. I don't have to beat my head against a wall to be successful. I have to be still and just recognize and be grateful for the abundance that's already here and just allow that to expand. And I know that sounds a little airy-fairy and woo-woo, but it's more true to my type as I now understand myself, the way my cognitive functions are wired from Myers-Briggs. And I get into human design, Enneagram, all these different profiles, wealth dynamics. Finding flow is the most important thing in my life. And that Michael Singer is the guy whose biography most exemplifies that. So that would be a book I would highly recommend for anybody, really, just as a counterpoint to all the other success literature and stories out there.
And what's the book of? Is it The Surrender Experiment?
Yep.
Book?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's called The Surrender Experiment. He also wrote The Untethered Soul. But
I've read that one.
It's his life story, and it's mind blowing. Probably listened to that one 6 times.
Okay, so it's an Audible. Cool, I'll check that out.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I'm also interested. Like, I asked for the audience, but I'm also invested in the wisdom that you're sharing. So now, I like this question. It's a scenario. So imagine that you had 60 seconds with 25-year-old Craig. If you can envision where he's at, what he's up to personally, professionally, relationships, all that. And if you had 60 seconds to give him some advice, what would you tell him to do, and what would you tell him not to do?
Well, it's too late to tell him to wrap it, but I highly recommend.
Well, he might not have listened. Would he have listened?
No, I think he thought he was pretty smart. Gosh, man. I mean, find a mentor who inspires you to be your best self. All the coaching, all the books in the world. I mean, there's only so much we can do for ourselves, to bootstrap our way forward. But I found that when I'm inspired, when there's literally somebody who I can emulate, who's done what I want to do, or who can somehow model for me the way to be, it literally shifts my neurochemistry, and I just get into a flow state. I'm just like, oh yeah, that's it. Like, I get that. And monkey see, monkey do. Our mirror neurons are so powerful. So find a mentor. And I had a ton of mentors. I mean, especially from Mankind Project, but find somebody that really truly inspires you, and serve your ass off. Just do everything you can to move them further along on their journey. And that's your ticket to get taken along for the ride.
Yeah, I like that. It's your ticket. All right. And even if you have to summarize some of your main points, what would you say is your philosophy on life and success?
Build your contribution system around your flow state.
I like that. Letting that soak in. I think sometimes when it's just so simple, it actually creates the most thinking.
Totally.
Okay, really good. And now, Craig, what's exciting you today? What are you excited for in this year?
Oh, man. I got invited to the mastermind. I hired a coach last year, Rich Litvin, and he wrote a book called The Prosperous Coach. If you are a coach, you have to read that book. And his partner in that book, Steve Chandler, also has some amazing, amazing books you need to read. But I got invited to be on the source team for that mastermind. And so I get to go to Santa Monica several times this year and just hang out with the top 4% of coaches in the world. And it totally turns my crank. I never thought I'd fall in love with LA. I love Santa Monica. It's totally a shock to me. And I just love the people that I get to be with in that room. I actually invited Jay Samit to come and hang out with us one day and get coached. And, I just love connecting people. So I'm excited for that. That's coming up in a couple weeks. And, I'm launching Enlightened Child this year. I'm actually finally, after 15 years, I'm talking to production and distribution for, to manufacture these toys and these prototypes that I've come up with to teach universal principles like the yin yang, and got, a whole series of things that don't have time to get into right now, but actually finally bringing that into the manifest realm. The whole laser engraving, prototyping, like all of this maker stuff has finally made it feasible for me to get into the game. And I'm excited for it. I'm looking at doing some art festivals and even getting into like a Kickstarter. So that's definitely got my attention, but I don't see it so clearly. I'm more just taking the next clear step and doing the Michael Singer thing of, I don't know how this is going to go. There's a million different possibilities, but I can see the next step and that's clear. And I'll just do that and relax.
I like that. That's good. That's good. There's a lot of exciting things coming your way, a lot of events, a lot of opportunities. And I think a lot of this is going to unfold nicely as you stay in your flow. As you say.
That's the idea.
I think that's just what's going to happen there. All right. Well, how can the audience follow up with you, Craig?
Cool. You know what, man? I'd love to offer, if you guys are interested in experiencing purpose mapping. You know, there's the whole Gandhi thing of be the change you want to see in the world. Somebody told me a derivation of that where they said, be the person you needed most when you needed them most. And so that was my, 24, 25-year-old self, or even 14-year-old self. I mean, I needed me to be there with purpose mapping and to just sort of say, look, you can spend the next 15, 20 years of your life investing $250,000 and banging your head against the wall in all of these directions that aren't going to work out for you, or you can just go through this process and just get streamlined and just get into flow and build your contribution system around your flow state. That's what purpose mapping does. And my mission is to purpose map 100 million millennials, which is like crazy and it's insane. And it's like Elon Musk wanting to colonize Mars. If it's not that big, it kind of doesn't get me lit. So that's my mission. And I would love to, anybody who's listening to this that would like to experience it, I'm going to put up a page at purposemapping.com/KFM, like Knowledge for Men. And just come to that page and you can sign up and I'll do a webinar and I will walk you guys through it and go out and kick some ass.
All right, Craig, thank you so much for sharing that with the audience. And thank you so much for this interview here. You provided tremendous value just in the form of your journey and the challenges that you've been through and sharing your insights of how you've overcome some of those challenges. So it's been my honor here having you here on the show.
Thanks so much, dude. You're a total rock star. I love what you're up to. And yeah, I'm just totally impressed, man. Keep leaning into your edge. Keep serving men. This is what the world needs. And just let me know how I can support you.
All right. Thank you so much, Craig.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast. Hundreds of interviews and millions of downloads later, we're continuing to build an international movement and we're just getting started. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a helpful review in iTunes because it really helps the podcast grow so we can impact even more men in the world who need this. Guys, this is all about living with purpose, where every day you only do things that matter to you. You wake up, live with purpose, and take massive action towards the life you want. And always remember, love the life you have while creating the life of your dreams. Go to kfmfree.com to get a surprise bonus I've made for my listeners. Again, that's kfmfree.com for something that's changed my life, and I'm offering it to you for free. Also, check out my Amazon best-selling books that I've written for you to help you crush life at kfmauthor.com. Again, that's kfmauthor.com to see all the books I've created to help you break through in life. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, founder of knowledgeformen.com, and I'll see you in the next episode.